Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tad Radzinski. I want to thank you all for joining our webinar today, Benchmarking and Measurement, Understanding Operations and Setting Meaningful Targets. It's now 2 o'clock and we're going to start the webinar. As we always do on our webinars, we're going to run through the slides and then at the end we'll be taking questions. I expect this webinar will probably go 35 to 40 minutes. And we'll have some time for questions, and these webinars are a lot more beneficial and interesting when people do ask questions, especially if you're in a mode in your organization where you're developing a sustainability program and working to get things rolling, or even if you have an established sustainability program and you have specific questions about maybe some challenges you're having around benchmarking and measurement. It'd be really great to ask some questions, and that all questions really help all the attendees. So please do that, and you can do that by basically typing them into the question box, which is down on your control panel. And I would encourage you that if you do have questions, instead of waiting to the end to do that, enter them as you think of them, and then at the end I'll look at them and I'll respond. So I want to let everyone know who's on the webinar today that this webinar will provide CEUs for anyone that has their professional engineering license or registered surveyor or different things like that. We are RCEP certified for this course, so if you do need to get credit for this, just email Caitlin and she will provide you a certificate for the course, which will allow you to get the credit for taking this course today. I also want to mention that this presentation is copyrighted by U.S. law and it cannot be reproduced without asking for permission from myself or Caitlin to do that. So I look forward to jumping right in here. So the purpose of our webinar today is to really gain an understanding of the value of benchmarking and measurement and really how important it is to understanding your operations. We do a lot of work with many manufacturers and many other organizations, and it's very important for them to have a good handle on the different impacts they're having, both from an economic, environmental, and social perspective. If you remember, we've talked quite a bit in past webinars about the triple bottom line, and we definitely need to keep this in mind as we're going through today. When we look at things to measure and benchmark, we are going to talk about environmental aspects, but we're also going to be talking about social and economic somewhat. So I definitely want people to keep this in mind. Often when we think about sustainability, we only think about the environmental aspects, and we don't always think about the fact that most organizations have connections on a social aspect side as well as economics. And some of the things that we'll be focusing on is understanding how to establish goals, utilizing practical tools to benchmark your operations, and then set goals. We'll also identify vital metrics that you should be tracking. There are several that I encourage every organization, regardless of what you do, to track, and we'll run through that today. We also want to talk about different methods for data collection. This is often a very big issue for many organizations, collecting data and getting the information. And then how you can use the benchmarking data to address concerns not only in your own organization, but then down through your supply chain. And just think about it, almost every organization is connected to a supply chain. We're a company that is basically doing consulting, and we have an office. So our supply chain, involves buying office supplies and various other things. But imagine if you're a manufacturer and purchasing a lot of raw materials or components to manufacture your products. There's definitely things you could be doing here. One thing I do want to say is the reason we do these webinars is to prepare people for ultimately integrating corporate responsibility into your business strategy. My goal, one of my big goals, is to get people to just do sustainability or corporate responsibility as a way of doing business and not as an add-on program. And We had a very successful seminar in May. We had 40-some people that attended that seminar, and we're going to be repeating the seminar in January, on January 28th, and these webinars build you up and get you ready to come to the seminar. And these seminars are designed for you to leave there with an action plan and next steps at what you're going to do to integrate sustainability right into your business strategy. So keep it in mind, I just show here the date is coming up, and we are accepting registrations right now, and I believe that we do have a reduced rate for the seminar if you register, be in the next few months here. So, and I know a lot of you might be also thinking about budget time. If you are going into budgeting season and you would like to come to this, good time now to find out more about it. You can check in with Caitlin and get some information, but definitely get registered and get it built into your budgets for 2015 so you can attend. We had a number of people last year that were unable to attend because they didn't have it in their plans for the year. So that's why we're getting the word out right now for early next year. So one thing that we do when we do sustainability is we pretty much have a roadmap for this. And as you can see on this slide, the key steps of a sustainability program, some very key elements are definitely getting management commitment. Now, I have said many times that there's many companies we've worked with that have not had management commitment. Oftentimes in that organization, someone in the organization is really interested in sustainability. They see that it's really critical for them to be competitive in the market or to keep their business going, and they will start to do some initiatives and get things rolling. And one of the first companies we ever worked with, that's what happened. It was one individual in the organization, a very large company, said, hey, we're going to start to lose market share if we don't start a sustainability program within our specific product division. And they just came to us and said, we need help, we want to get some things rolling. So that is one scenario where you don't have any management commitment, and that company now has a very robust and strong sustainability program. There are times, though, where you're going to have management from the top down basically saying, we're going to do this, we're going to have a corporate responsibility program, this is going to be the way we do business. I was just at a meeting earlier this week, and one of the folks I met with said, our goal is we don't even want people to think this is anything different. This is just our standard way of doing business. And he was from the management team. So I thought that was excellent to hear, because that's really the direction you want to go. So then we typically encourage most organizations to get a sustainability team together to educate that team. And then the very next step is conducting a sustainability assessment. And in order to do an effective job of that, you really have to collect data and benchmark your operations. And that's the whole point of the webinar today, to talk about benchmarking and measurement. And once you do that, you have a really good understanding of, maybe the energy you're using, the raw materials, your costs, carbon footprint, water consumption, how many hours you're doing training, maybe your safety program performance, your connections to community as far as volunteerism. All these different things you'll have a handle on by doing your benchmarking of your operations and getting a really good handle on that. Then once you have all that, you can start to do the next steps you see here, getting a vision, mission, and policy statement, basically developing your triple bottom line performance. And that's what I was talking about earlier, looking at people, planet, and profit, the different impacts there for you as an organization, developing some sustainability goals. And then based on that data collection and the sustainability assessment, you're going to have a good idea of different things you can do to improve operations or to change some social aspects or to do some things on an economic basis to really improve your performance overall. And that's really what the sustainability program is all about. And like I said, this slide, if you continue to follow these webinars for the next few months here, we'll be visiting this slide periodically as we do additional topics here. And most of our webinars coming up do build upon this one today, collecting data and benchmarking, and explain the next steps you have to do as far as making sustainability part of your corporate business strategy. So let's talk a little bit about benchmarking now. And really what benchmarking is collecting data on various aspects of your operations And it's really important when you do that, not just to collect, say, consumption data, but to really understand how much things cost as well. So in the example I show in this slide, we basically are showing estimated electricity consumption, and this is a really good thing to do. We know, for example, in this particular case, let's just say this particular facility is using 10 million kilowatt hours of electricity a year. What was important to do was to take the next step and say, okay, where is this energy being used? And as you can see in this pie chart, this really gives us a really good understanding of, okay, where's electricity being used? And you can see that the majority of the pie, roughly 60 some percent of the pie, is affiliated or associated with specific equipment and operations. The general plant one, gives us an idea that there's about 30 some percent of the energy that's used on certain machines and plug loads and things like that we weren't able to nail down. But once we know that data, we can do a really effective job then of saying, okay, now we're going to evaluate opportunities to reduce electricity consumption. And if I look at this, my HVAC or my drying ovens or my blowers are all using some pretty big amounts of energy here. And this is a task where you can actually focus on those specific pieces of the pie that are going to be the biggest bang for the dollar. So collecting the data, establishing benchmarking metrics is going to be really important. And then what it allows you to do when you start to measure, it gives you the ability to monitor your progress over time and establish realistic targets and goals. And that's really what benchmarking is all about. So one thing we'll talk about today is not just collecting annual or monthly data for the various aspects you're going to be tracking, but really looking at the cost of those and really using that information to evaluate your performance in your operation. The other photo I show here is an EMON-DEMON, which is a submeter that you can install on any operation to basically submeter electric circuits. And we strongly encourage any organization that we work with, whether you're a manufacturer or a building owner, it's really important to be able to understand not just the total utility cost, but how electricity, for example, is being used within the facility. Same thing goes for water. If you have multiple different types of equipment or operations that use water in different ways, you want to be able to meter that. That's been very helpful for us in the past as well, for actually finding large leaks in operations and finding significant opportunities for cost savings. One time we were working in a facility, and when we did the benchmarking, we said there's something wrong here. You guys are using about double the amount of water you should. Had the facility install some water meters, and we were able to identify that there was actually a leak underground of about 4 million gallons a year, which was about $20,000 in water costs for this company. So, that was a pretty huge find, and we would have never known that if we didn't start benchmarking, understanding how water was being used, and take a hard look at what was happening in that facility. So again, when you benchmark, part of it is really understanding the data. And I also want to say that most times when you establish benchmarking, you're going to set things up. For example, let's say you're a manufacturer, you're going to want to look at your, let's just say, energy consumption per ton of production, or energy consumption per widget, or carbon footprint, pounds of CO2 equivalent per ton or per widget, that kind of thing. Benchmarking is basically getting the metric you're tracking set up against some kind of operational metric. And the reason we want to do that is obviously, most people on here are working somewhere, and the goal is to stay in business and make more products. And when you do that, if you're making more products, you're going to end up using more energy, more water, more waste, maybe creating, using more packaging. So you want to have a means of measuring to that production to really understand how you're doing against your goals. So when we talk about what to benchmark, these are typical performance indicators that I recommend be measured, and the first two are items that need to be measured for every organization. I don't care if you're a nonprofit, a school, or you're a large manufacturer. even a transportation company or a distribution company. But energy consumption and cost is critical to measure because all of us use energy, and we do know that the state we're in the world right now, making a lot of impacts by consuming a lot of energy, and energy, especially electricity production, is one of the largest, has some of the largest impacts in the world, when it comes to making electricity, as far as, releasing greenhouse gases, creating solid waste, releasing toxics like mercury, all kinds of different things. So understanding your energy consumption is really important, and tracking that cost is critical, because when you do get into the evaluation phase of your sustainability assessment, where you're going to be measuring different items and you're going to be trying to figure out where you want to save energy, having that cost information is going to be really critical. Next thing I strongly recommend for everybody is to do your carbon footprint. I strongly recommend doing Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, and we'll actually be doing a webinar on that in the future here, where we're going to really just talk about carbon, but measuring the actual fuels you burn and creating CO2 from that and other greenhouse gases, as well as the electricity you consume. And for all of us that are on this webinar today, you don't have to just do this for your organization. When I'm teaching at Villanova, it's mandatory in all my classes that my students actually benchmark their lives, and they measure their carbon footprint, personal carbon footprint, by looking at the fuel they use in their vehicles, what they use in their own homes and their offices, what type of waste they generate, how much water they use, all that kind of stuff. So this is a great way to get started. Like, let's say you really want to get into this, you've never done it, start doing it in your own life. Start looking at your electricity bill, start looking at the gasoline you purchase for your vehicle, or let's say you're an electric hybrid or something, how much electricity are you using to charge your vehicle, or all kinds of different things. How many coffee cups do you use in a day or a week? All kinds of different stuff you can measure. So I would definitely say energy and carbon, highly encouraged and recommended for every organization. Next thing we can look at is, let's say that you're using renewable energy or alternative fuels. That's a great way to reduce carbon footprint. Whether you're buying solar power or you're buying wind power, different things like that, you want to be able to do that. Or even from the case of alternative fuels, let's just say that you're using liquefied natural gas or compressed natural gas in the vehicles you drive. That's an alternative fuel now, and it's a lower impact fuel compared to diesel or gasoline. Another thing would be water consumption and cost. That's, depending on your organization, that is sometimes easy and sometimes not. I know, for example, in our own office, we're leasing our office space, and it's tough to get water data. The building has 1 meter, and the way the plumbing is configured, it's been hard for us to get our landlord to want to put in a water meter for us. So we've estimated our water consumption, based on various calculators we've developed and that kind of thing. But that's something you definitely want to be measuring. And you typically will do that based on a utility meter. Now, let's say that you're a company, though, or an organization that's not on public water. What you could do there with water consumption is you can install a meter. You can buy a simple water meter off of McMaster-Carr or some of the different Granger or different suppliers like that. Have that installed, and then start to take your own meter readings and use that as a means of measuring. So if we don't have the opportunity, like with electricity or natural gas, or no utility for water, you definitely want to put in your own metering. Another thing we like to look at is green products. This is another one that most organizations can definitely benchmark and measure, and that involves, looking at the spend for the products that you purchase for your operation. So I know, and I'm actually going to show some examples of a bunch of these shortly, but if you look at this, let's say you're purchasing office supplies or paper or coffee cups or cleaning products, you should, number one, establish a sustainable purchasing procedure, and then basically use that information to track your purchases. And I know we met with a company this week, actually, that is very focused on selling green and sustainable products, and they actually offer a means for you as the purchaser to report to you what green and sustainable products you purchased, which makes it a lot easier for you to measure. Another thing that's really important to measure is waste generation, and I can tell you this is another big challenge when it comes to measuring this, because most organizations, maybe they have a dumpster outside their facility, and all the waste from the facility goes into that dumpster. Oftentimes the waste haulers don't have a very good means of telling you exactly how much the weight is of that material. If they're taking, say, a big compactor, they pick up, a big roll-off, and they can basically put it on a truck, they take it to the landfill, then they can definitely give you that data. But if it's a small container, let's say a 4 or 6 or an 8-yard container, the truck comes along, the trash truck puts the forks down and basically picks that thing up and dumps it in the truck, they have no way of telling you how many pounds of material was in that. So often when you get into waste generation, measuring that comes to a lot of estimating. We've been working for years with different waste haulers and other companies to try to figure out the best way to measure that. Sometimes we're successful, but if you're a small operation like our company, where we've got one dumpster shared by the whole building, it's hard to really measure. So what we do, we actually have the lowest person on the totem pole, usually an intern or a new employee, gets tasked with weighing our recycling and our trash every week. We actually have a fish scale, and that's done, and we track it. So you can get to that level. That's one way you can measure and benchmark waste. When you get into a really big building, though, or a big operation, or multiple facilities, then it gets a lot more challenging. So there's different ways you can attack all of this. Other things that I strongly encourage people to measure is, for example, if you're a manufacturing operation or even a transportation company, employee safety and minimizing accidents is really important to track. Really important to track training as well. We also look at social responsibility. Some big things to measure there would be, for example, volunteer hours or donations of time or money. And I'm actually going to show an example of that coming up shortly here. So again, the social responsibility piece is very big. Right now, one thing we're going to have a future webinar on is called materiality, and really trying to understand what's most important to my business or your business. And when you do something like that, measuring those social aspects is something that's getting a lot more attention now. It's not easy to measure, but it is something that is coming to play. Other social aspects that could be measured is making sure there's no child labor, or making sure that if you're buying materials, say from a low-cost country, that's a new term that we hear a lot, that would indicate like Vietnam or China, where that there's good safety programs. We don't want to have situations like Bangladesh where the factory collapses and a whole bunch of people die when they're making clothing. So those things are really hard to measure, but those could be aspects that are important to you and you should be measuring. So along with your benchmarking and measurement, materiality is going to be a really important thing you need to understand too. What's important to you, what's important to your stakeholders. So let's take a look at some data. We've got some data here showing 2 different facilities, and this is real life data, and we basically sanitized it. And if you look at this, we have 2 facilities, Facility A and Facility B. Facility A and Facility B make the same exact products. But what's really interesting, if you look at their costs, and this is where benchmarking comes in really handy when you're trying to integrate sustainability into your business strategy, understanding what it costs to do business. And if you look here, raw materials for one is $193, where the other one is $219. So you're probably saying, well, what's the difference if they're both making the same product? Well, some of them have different suppliers. So based on the location in the country, they have to buy raw materials from different suppliers, and they end up paying more or less, depending on the location of that supplier. Also look at the packaging. One thing when you're benchmarking operations, if you're selling something, packaging by far will blow away a lot of things. A lot of companies don't get this. It's a huge opportunity. You look at electricity here. Basically, the benchmarking here shows $1.44. This is all best benchmarked per ton of production, for example. Natural gas, waste, propane, water. All these are pretty small costs, but that cost of packaging and raw materials alone are huge. So when you do get to the point where you're doing your sustainability assessment of your operation, if you have good data on your raw materials, your packaging, you can walk around your facility then, you're going to say, wow, look at this. here's material X. It's spilling off this conveyor belt, not going fully into the product. And based on our analysis, we now know that we're losing for every pound of that material falling on the ground costs us $25 or $50. And most of you are probably sitting on the phone saying, well, that makes common sense. Some people should know that, but I'm going to tell you right now, most people don't know that. And getting these metrics when you're doing a sustainability assessment is huge, and that's why it's so important to benchmark. You can do the same thing for if you're just an office building. You can basically look at what's it costing us for electricity, natural gas, what's our waste management cost, how much is water. All of these things can be measured, and it gives you a great means of then going to management saying, hey, we benchmark things. This is the areas we're going to focus in based on this cost data and consumption data, and here's where the opportunities come. One thing we always do is we say, okay, when we're looking at these costs, what does it cost? What would the savings be if we could reduce this by 1%? And then once I have that 1% knowledge, that's when I can walk around the facility and say, wow, look at this. Look at all that packaging in the dumpster. 1%, if we reduce that by 1%, that's $250 or $10,000, depending on the size of the organization. And again, some of these things really add up. And I can tell you, I'm a big fan of reducing my costs in my operation so we can run much more efficiently. And even in your own home, think about it. If you don't know how many kilowatt hours you're using and what it costs you, you should know that, because just by turning off some lights or changing light bulbs in your own home or reducing your thermostat setting, that means dollars back in your pocket that maybe you can spend on going out for a nice dinner or going to a movie or whatever, but not giving it to the utility company. So that's the value of really understanding these. So here's another interesting point. The reason we benchmark, this example shows multiple facilities. You can see here facility A's carbon footprint per ton. Again, remember I said we want to benchmark if you're manufactured to something like per ton or whatever. And you can see here we're benchmarking pounds of CO2 equivalent per ton of production. We have multiple years, and we always do multiple years. I strongly encourage when you do your benchmarking and measurement, you want to do multiple years so you can compare performance. Usually what you will set up is a baseline year. Okay, in this particular case, baseline year is 2012, and maybe this company has some goals that they want to achieve by 2014. And you can see here 2014 is only partial data. It's January through June. However, it gives us something, right? And ideally what you want to see is if you have a good program, you're going to see things trending downward. But as you can see here, this carbon footprint for this organization in particular looks like it's heavily driven by electricity for both facility A and B, and natural gas is second. You can see between 2012 and 2013, facility A, their carbon footprint per ton went down from, say, roughly 78 to maybe 70 or 71 pounds of CO2 equivalent per ton of production. But look at over here at facility B. This facility is making the same kind of products, and their carbon footprint is almost more than double what the other one was, 160 tons or pounds of CO2 equivalent per ton of production. So that's instant flag. Why is this? I can guarantee you that facility B is probably using a lot more fuels, electricity and natural gas, etc., which is driving those impacts. But having this data gives us the ability to really look at it and to really explore what's going on. And the other nice thing about a benchmark like this is it also says, wow, we don't use a lot of electricity in this facility compared to, say, natural gas, but the electricity has a much higher carbon footprint, so that would tell you then time to focus in on what we can do to save electricity, even though we use a lot more natural gas in our operation. And that's dependent upon the grid you're in, because all of us are in electrical grid. And in every electrical grid, the way electricity is produced will vary. It could be nuclear, it could be fossil fuels, it could be coal, it could be hydro, could be renewable electricity. So all of those affect how you measure your carbon footprint. So let's say that you're on the call here, you're a facility manager for a bunch of buildings. I just showed you something if you're a manufacturer, how you measure. But one thing you can do here, this is an example if you're, say, a facility manager. Here's for portfolio buildings that we worked on, and you can see there's multiple buildings here. So we list important metrics here. We show the gross area by square foot of the buildings. We show the number of stories, the number of occupants, the annual energy consumption, annual energy expense, annual energy consumption per area, kBTUs per square foot. So the nice thing, once I have that data, I can say, okay, I can look at building A versus building G, and I can see that building A is only 86.97 kBTUs per square foot, but then I look at building G, 129.70. So obviously these buildings, there's something going on in building G where they're not nearly as efficient. Then we can benchmark water, carbon footprint. As you can see here, we measure the carbon footprint for all these buildings. And, you know, why do we care about occupants in a building? Well, the more occupants, the more electricity that's consumed, because every occupant will probably have a computer. Every occupant also is using the restrooms. Every occupant is generating waste. So these type of metrics are really important when you're looking at your building. Other things that we look at for buildings is portfolio manager score for Energy Star. If the building can be Energy Star certified, is LEED existing building certification feasible, yes or no, and that depends heavily on the energy performance of the building, because that's a prerequisite. Or you know, we can even list things here like how much are the certification fees. These spreadsheets can be as detailed as you want, but this is the tool we typically use for benchmarking. It's most often spreadsheets for measuring everything: electricity, energy, water, waste, carbon, and then buildings. You know, we can definitely look at that. And ideally, just like I showed you the comparison of facility A and facility B with the carbon metrics right before this slide, same thing here. You want to be looking at these building benchmarks and say, all right, here's the performance, and now you can ask the questions: why is building A better than building B? Why is building A using, you know, less energy than building G? What's different about these buildings? Is the HVAC system different? Is it a different climate zone? You know, all kinds of different aspects that it'll give you the ability to ask. So I mentioned earlier about tracking, say, sustainable purchases, and here's a great example of this. One thing you can look at when you're tracking purchasing, here's an example. This is for our company, and you can see we started measuring in 2009. That's our baseline year. We keep this ongoing. And ultimately what we want to do is be using, number one, we want to do is use less materials. I want to, you know, part of our whole sustainability initiative is to use less overall. So first thing we want to do is cut down the amount of products we even use or buy. One thing we've been doing is going to a paperless office where everything's electronic. All our information comes in, drawings, everything else comes in electronic. We keep everything electronically, which has greatly reduced our printing and the amount of material we have to recycle. So we don't even want to generate the waste in the first place. But then you can see here in 2013, a large majority of what we purchased was recycled. The non-recycled has gone down a lot, but that's also because we reduced our purchases considerably. We always specify and utilize green office cleaners. Are not, you know, biodegradable and you know, very healthy and safe cleaning. And then you can also see in some years where we had a lot of purchases of, say, new computers as we added new employees and things like that. Our Energy Star electronics we track as well. So good things that you can think about measuring. Waste print. This is a very interesting thing to show here. If you look at the graph on the left, this is total waste generated in pounds. And you can notice this is from our office. Remember I told you that the intern, or the lowest person on the totem pole, usually gets tasked every week with weighing these materials. First of all, we're trying not to generate them in the first place. We don't even want to throw anything away by not creating the waste in the first place. But if you look at our total recycling, the blue and the red here shows you that we're recycling a considerable amount, and our landfill waste we're measuring. But you know, one thing that I know that happened in 2013 was we ended up hiring more people. So obviously we're going to create more materials, and we start to see that. And the beauty is by measuring the waste generation in pounds per employee, as you see on the right, that's the benchmark. It shows that we are actually, in some cases, reducing our consumption of materials and our generation of waste. 2010 was our baseline year. I can see we weren't very efficient there. Compared to 2012, we ended up adding quite a few new staff. So ideally what we want to try to do is see the trend going downward. And the biggest thing for us when is in our waste is basically employee lunch materials. So if someone goes out for lunch and they bring basically their lunch back, oftentimes it's the packaging from that lunch that ends up in the trash. That's what our biggest challenge, and one of the things we really focus on. We just started composting this year. We got permission to do that by the landlord, and we're composting now. So that's helpful, and we'll see our trash go down even more because that's less material that we actually have to throw out. And our goal is to get to zero waste to landfill. And the challenge is the packaging. We continue to work on that. So I mentioned earlier about the ability to track social aspects. One thing that's really important to us in our company is our community service that we provide. You can see here these are actually vegetable gardens that we've installed. We basically manage a program where we grow vegetables in these various raised beds with not only our employees but other tenants in the building. We have other folks that get into participating here. And we started this in 2012. And what we did is we tracked all the food we produced, and we end up donating the majority of it to local shelters that are, basically helping people who, have lost their job or are homeless or whatever. And you can see in 2012, our total production in food was about 160 pounds. 2013, though, we were, much higher than that, over 300 pounds of food donated to the local food banks. So to me, that's pretty incredible. And we also track our volunteer hours. As a company, we had 409 volunteer hours for 2013, which is pretty good because we have, not a huge number of employees. But what's really cool about this, too, is not only are we providing value and benefit to the community by doing this, but see everybody out there working in the garden. It's amazing some of the ideas that come out of there. Typically, we're out there working in the garden, once a day for watering or that kind of thing. But just getting the employees up away from their desks and out outside in the nature, working in the soil and basically connected to the earth and everything, has generated some incredible ideas, really fosters some great creativity, and really, makes people feel good about what they're doing, not only for the community, but also helps them in their everyday job. So think about a lot of these things you're going to do are not only going to provide benefit to you, but also the community and right down to your employee level. So this next slide, what I want to talk about, I know a lot of these you're probably sitting here saying, wow, lots of graphics here, but really when you're talking benchmarking and measurement, it's incredibly important to look at data. And this slide is a great story. Basically, we show 4 different items here, and this is an actual data from a company that we have done work for. And one thing that we found was this company had done a pretty good job of reducing, say, water use and energy in their facilities. However, they kind of hit a plateau where there was not a lot they could do anymore because of large capital expense and whatnot. So the thing we suggested was, you've got several thousand employees working for you. We should train them on how they can reduce in their job every day either water, energy, or waste. And what happened, and this is the number of employees trained, and you can see in 2010 there was roughly 2,000 that were trained, then coming up on over 3,000 in 2011, then 2012, over 4,000 employees trained. And the training started in 2011 where we started going out to these facilities, created these little 15-minute modules on energy reduction, water reduction, waste reduction, not only things the employees can do for the owner and the man, the company that they were working for, but things they could do in their own personal lives at home. And what's really cool is, based on this, just going from one small sustainability team or one certain person who was in charge of sustainability to getting everybody to care about it, roughly 4,500 employees or 4,200 employees look at the results that happened as far as the reductions in water. Now, there was a combination here of employees being more aware and some changes in some of the operations, but you can see here, even in energy consumption, look at the drop there, and that's per ton of production. And this isn't a time where, if you think about where we are in the economy now, this particular company was coming out of a really rough time, and their production was ramping up every year after the Great Recession that we just went through. So what I'm trying to show you here is everything you do from a sustainability perspective is connected. That training resulted in water savings, energy savings, waste reductions, and not only did it happen for the company, but imagine how many of these employees went home and said, "Oh, I learned something. I'm going to, maybe not let the water run while I'm brushing my teeth, or I'm going to, basically change my light bulbs and put in some LEDs or whatever." Suddenly, they're getting benefits at home. So this particular company affected 4,000 employees to help them with their company metrics, but then all those 4,000 employees went out and did, hopefully did something in their own personal lives, which expanded that impact reduction much bigger. So this is an exciting story, and I cannot tell you enough. Training is a very critical aspect of everything you do in corporate strategy development and corporate sustainability. So training will be very important. So those examples, they give you a good idea of how to measure these various things. Couple key points here. So once you've done your benchmarking, the next thing you're going to want to do is develop your facility green team, set some goals. You're going to want to develop a plan. After you have set your goals, you're going to want to say, okay, how are we going to basically, take this data? How are we going to meet these goals? Or how are we going to reduce energy consumption, reduce our carbon footprint? How are we going to increase our volunteer hours or training hours? You develop the plan and then you hold accountable. So in the future webinars we have coming up, we're really going to talk about these next steps on how you go from taking the benchmarking data to establishing your goals, to developing the plan, to holding people accountable, getting employee engagement, getting management engagement, all that kind of great stuff there. So these are the key aspects I wanted to cover today. I know we have quite a bit of time here for some questions, and it looks like I've got a number of questions here. I'm going to address those shortly. But just to have a summary here, for those of you that are going to earn the CEUs for this today, or the PDHs, basically our goal was to talk about understanding how to establish well-defined goals. So we talked about that a little bit as far as what to benchmark and what to focus on, and then how to use that data, what practical tools you can use to benchmark. So I already mentioned to you multiple things, definitely getting information from utility meters, establishing spreadsheets, measuring performance. We have a couple companies though that we work with that have there's one company we're working with that has 100,000 facilities around the world. So imagine the challenge of benchmarking that. They actually had to create their own software program to do that. It's an ongoing process. They're doing a very good job of measuring energy and carbon. They did that first. The next module they did was water, and now they're working on waste, which is their biggest challenge. But they're so big, they want to have to measure this data and be able to compare and trend and track. So being able to use these metrics to trend and track and understand your organization is really important. You also want to be able to understand different methods of data collection. We talked about some things you could be doing, whether it's installing meters or using utility data. If you're tracking things like volunteer hours, you're going to have to measure and report that. In our company, our employees do timesheets, and they basically track their volunteer hours there, so we can measure that right through our time tracking system. You're definitely going to want to leverage your benchmarking then to address concerns throughout your supply chain. We didn't talk a lot about that, but now once you have that data, you can actually go back down the supply chain. And for those of you that are manufacturers, or even for us, big thing about us and our supply chain for our purchases, we're purposely sourcing office materials and products and different things from companies that can give us the data we want. So we were able to say, hey, office company supplier, can you tell us, track all the green purchases we make each year and give us a report at the end? Oh yes, you can. That's great. Then we're going to go with you. Oh, you can't. Another one couldn't. So we said, okay, we're not going to purchase from you then. So, you have the ability as a person involved heavily in sustainability to really push this. So let's take some questions now. I'm going to give me a second to expand upon my question box. And let's see what we got here. All right, wow, we got quite a few. All right, the first question I have here is, what do you consider more important to benchmark against national or industry standards or company self-generated goals and standards? Well, that's a really excellent question, and it's going to depend on your organization. If you're a company, say, that is very specific or a niche market, then I would say you definitely want to benchmark against your own performance. If the data is available, say, for national and industry standards, for example, let's say that you're a company that's making a certain product and there's an industry association out there that's maybe done a life cycle assessment of a particular product, then you would have an idea on what's going on, from say a national perspective. There's different manufacturers out there that work in associations. For example, SPFA, Spray Polyurethane Foam Association, NAMA, National Association of Insulation Manufacturers, Unibel, all these different groups. A lot of these organizations have done industry-wide LCAs, and what they're going to be publishing is average data, say, for a particular product. And once you have that, you can definitely benchmark your operation to that. In fact, we strongly encourage that for any companies we work for, that there is industry average data or some type of national standard. You definitely want to build upon that, because then that tells you how you're performing against your competitors or against an average that's out there. Very valuable. But you do want to get your data first, so you're going to want to measure your data internally first and then look to compare to that. So let's see, we have another question here. Give me 1 second. There's a question here that says, are there benefits to using Portfolio Manager beyond just building energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, other metrics? That's a great question. Portfolio Manager, as many of you may or may not know, is a free program available from the EPA or the Department of Energy that allows you to enter data on energy consumption and water consumption for a building. And some buildings can be benchmarked in Portfolio Manager and actually give you an Energy Star score, but others can't. The great thing about that tool is it does give you the ability to give you a carbon footprint. So it will tell you greenhouse gas emissions, it will tell you measure water consumption, that kind of thing. So I definitely encourage people to utilize that tool. Even if you can't get an Energy Star score, you will get a metric, say, for kBTUs per square foot for your particular operation, so that's really valuable. Okay, I got another question here. What is a good way to measure the amount of waste we are sending to a landfill? Oh, well, that's a good question. To answer this question, it's going to depend on the size of your organization. If you're a small organization like us, where we have people measuring and weighing the waste every week, that's a great way. But if you're large, then you need to work with your waste management companies and establish a plan and program for that. That could include maybe changing the containers you do, or having them provide much better estimates for you. There's a lot of different things you can do there. I talked about that pretty much today. So keep that in mind as you're looking at the different things you can do there. I got another one. As a building owner / landlord, how do I obtain benchmarking data from my tenants? Well, this is often a challenge. We work in a lot of tenant lease buildings, and the thing you have to do there is definitely establish a relationship with the tenants. Oftentimes, if you're, say, renewing a lease, you can basically make that a lease requirement that they have to provide that data. But there are situations where some tenants just don't want to provide it. We have found that if you let them know that the goal of you measuring this stuff is to try to reduce their costs and improve, maybe their quality of comfort, or save them money, that typically provides some very good benefit, and they will often get interested in that. Okay, here's another question. I have many buildings served by one gas meter, one water meter, and several electrical meters. How do I benchmark my buildings which are not separately metered. There, two things you can do. One, you could look at total consumption and then do a metric, evaluating those per square foot of area. That's one thing you could do. The other thing you could do is install submeters and start to measure that. So, that's something to keep in mind. Got another question here. What is the typical fee structure for benchmarking? Fee structure, I guess it's going to depend. I mean, most companies we work with do their own benchmarking, where they'll collect all this data, they'll work with their purchasing, and they basically pull it all together, and then we'll help them, basically decipher it and analyze it. Some companies, though, like I mentioned, that company that has 100,000 buildings around the world, they made a huge investment into benchmarking because they had to pay for the development of software, and that software has to be populated. They had to train many, many people around the world to enter the data. So it can depend. If we're just helping someone, if that's the only thing they're doing, depending on the size of their organization, it could be $1,500 to $10,000, depending on what kind of help they're looking for, if we were going to help them do it. So hopefully I answered that question, because it's not clear exactly what this person was looking for. And I have one more here, and then I think we'll wrap it up for the day, let everybody get back to work. Let's see. Oh, in this particular one, the question is, when we have a situation where our production is increasing and we haven't had the ability to reduce, say, energy consumption, we're going to see an increase in our energy consumption per ton. How is that helpful? Well, it is helpful because, number one, once you actually start to implement the energy conservation measures that you might determine, or you figure out ways to reduce energy consumption, it's going to start to show your progress. So I strongly encourage every organization to measure no matter what, and then as that, as you get more and more data, you're going to be able to utilize that to really evaluate the direction you're going. If you aren't measuring in that way and then you make these changes, you're never going to know how it works out. So important to know that, okay, I made this change in my facility, here is the result. And again, if your production's increasing, your business is really growing, your sustainability program has helped you, really accelerate and get a huge competitive advantage where everybody's buying your product or services, then you're going to want to be able to say, okay, we did these things, and now we can see that actually, even though our production is going up, our energy savings per widget are really going down, and you'll start to see that, even though your total consumption might increase. So again, very good questions. Definitely excited to, provide more information. I just want to remind everybody that we are having the seminar on January 28th here in Philadelphia. If you can make it, I strongly encourage you. The people that attended that last year got a lot of great results out of that. A lot of people have really hit the ground running, and they're getting results in their companies. I also want to mention that we do have 2 more webinars coming up very soon. August 7th, we're going to be doing lean and green manufacturing using sustainability assessments. That's going to be Jim Melentine and Kara Watson from Sustainable Solutions Corporation that will be doing that webinar. And then I'm going to be doing another one on August 28th, about a month from now, where we're going to be talking about materiality, managing long-term risk. One thing that I would say, that if you are interested in these topics, number one, we always provide the recordings, but also I do have a blog, and I have various recordings that I've done, both video blogs on many of these topics, where you can get to learn more if you're interested in that. So I want to thank everybody for joining today. It's about 2:55, so I don't have any new questions, so I'd like to wrap it up. And again, I appreciate everybody joining. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in future webinars. If you do ever have any suggestions on topics you'd like to learn about, I'm always open to that. Please email me and provide comments. So thank you very much, and have a great day, have a great summer. Look forward to talking to you again in August.